Good evening. This is Sue Kramer. Welcome to the first episode in the Fall Fitness series. I'm so happy that you've all tuned in. There are a few things that I'd like to say before we do get started, so bear with me. I'm Sue Kramer, Alpine Examiner and coach of the Alpine Examining staff. I'm an ACE team member and author of the book Be Fit to Ski. And with me is Marjorie King, and she's got a full list of credentials, a full list that she will explain to you a little later on. But before we get started, there are some people that I would like to thank. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Eastern Division, PSIA AASI, and also the people who are behind the scenes right now, Karen and Don Haringa, who have put more time into this than they thought they would have to. And also Angelo Ross, who is an Alpine ETS member as well as our National E-Learning Task Force member. And they've done an incredible job. And without them, none of these webinars would happen. So thank you all. And on our end, the audio and video are working. So if you have problems, please check your settings. And a couple other things that I'm supposed to tell you. So hang on a sec. I do want to say that in order to avoid some streaming problems, the contributors prepared their presentations beforehand. So what you're going to see is their pre-recorded presentations, but they will be available, like Marjorie is going to be available to answer your questions throughout this webinar. So if you see on the right-hand side, there's something that's got questions, and that's where you can type in your questions, and we'll try to get as many as possible in this webinar. Look for a short survey link afterwards in the next couple of days. And in order for you to get your credit, you actually have to do the survey. So thanks for doing that. And on that note, I think we are going to start out. So Angelo, who's working behind the scenes, he's like the wizard behind the curtain. Maybe you can start that first video.
Welcome to the 2020 Fall Fitness Series. I'm Sue Kramer, Alpine Examiner and Children's Education Team Member, and I'll be your host for this series. There are many subjects to learn on your way to becoming a great snow sports instructor. You study communication skills, group handling, biomechanics, and you know about proper boot fitting and how that enhances peak performance. And you know that keeping in shape is really good for you. The purpose of this series is to talk about exercise and fitness as it's specifically related to skiing and riding. Through collective brainstorming over the past 6 months, a group of passionate and talented experts within our membership and educational teams developed 5 webinars, each one building off the other, all to share ideas and tools to help you be as ready for winter as possible. You'll notice from the group of outcomes the complexity of training for snow sports. The perspective we've adopted while planning the series is to start with a balanced body by assessing first how we stand and how we make basic movements. From a balanced and aligned body, we build the energy systems and strength needed to then dive into what most think of as dryland training. We give you tips on how to stay properly fueled throughout your day, as well as suggestions on how to tailor training to meet your specific and individualized needs. Next up, I'll briefly introduce each of the courses and their developers. In our first webinar, Dr. Marjorie King, Professor of Physical Therapy and Biomechanics and Alpine Level 3, takes us through the importance of postural alignment that supports functional movement and offers ways to assess ourselves. In her words, good postural and biomechanical alignment is essential in order to optimize peak on-snow performance. In webinar number 2, a multidisciplined team will walk us through exercises and ideas to correct alignment issues and get us moving freely. Karen Delory, tele-examiner, yoga and stand-up paddleboard instructor, and Jim Polinchuk, Alpine Dev Team, ACE, and certified personal trainer, will give us tips on how to maintain joint stability and mobility. Joe Forte, ACE, Snowboard Level 3 and Director of Adventure Sports at Blue Mountain, will give us exercises to enhance balance, provide indoor and outdoor bodyweight balance tools while offering insight to proprioception and biomechanics relative to balance. The more stability, flexibility, and mobility we have, the more we're able to manage and adapt to variables like terrain, speed, and turn radius. Building endurance and strength is our third webinar. C.B. McCleary, Alpine Dev Team and First Line Certified Trainer, and Brian Donovan, Snowboard Examiner and Eastern Team member, and myself will discuss what types of off-snow workouts build strength relative for skiing and riding. We'll cover specific muscle groups and function. I'll focus on how to incorporate high-intensity bouts of effort and why training aerobically and anaerobically are important for snow sports. Power and agility best describe dryland training and is our fourth webinar. Our specialist will explain how each lends itself to building essential movement tools no matter what you choose for your sliding pleasure. Candice Cresci, a workout enthusiast and Alpine ETS, will focus on the power part of the equation, and Josh Hagen, Alpine Examiner and Eastern Team member, will provide fun ways to develop agility right in your own backyard. Greg Fatigate, Snowboard Examiner and Eastern Team member, gives a sneak peek at what he does to train for big hill riding. They'll show you fun activities that you can easily do at home. In our final webinar, I'll offer guidelines for building your own program. It's important to note that everyone has preferences for exercise modalities. The intent is to become a more prepared athlete for the winter season and to actually enjoy the journey. Nutritionist and Alpine Dev Team member Matt Heller will introduce you to macronutrients and the importance of eating right for a day of teaching, exam taking, or high-octane days at altitude. And wrapping up the series, Alpine Examiner and Eastern Team member Chef Pete will share his cooking talents to show us how to make healthy and tasty meals. So how does this work? We'll be launching one webinar per week for the next 5 weeks. You'll be able to ask your questions to our guest panelists. And if you've forgotten something or if you want to go back and review, they'll be up until November 15th. Are you ready?
All right. So there's two sayings that have come with this current atmosphere. One is the new normal, and the other is, can you hear me? So, can you hear me, Marjorie?
Yes, I can, Sue, and thank you very much. So this is just a brief hello to be able to say hi in person. We did pre-tape everything to try to minimize any problems, so we can probably just get her started.
Yes, yes, and on to you then.
Hi, I'm Margie King. I'd like to thank the Professional Ski Instructors of America, Eastern Division, education staff for allowing me to be a part of this fabulous fall fitness webinar series. I'll be the lead-off speaker, and I'm talking about optimizing alignment for peak performance. I just want to give you a little bit of my background so that you know kind of where I'm coming from. So I have a PhD in sports medicine from the University of Virginia. I have a master's in exercise and sports science from UMass Amherst. I have a master's in personal and organizational health from Plymouth State. I was inducted into the National Athletic Trainers Hall of Fame. I'm a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine, and I also have my level 3 Alpine certification. So what we're going to do with this information that will be delivered is try to give you a baseline information of what you need to understand for your own body movement and mechanics. I've been working in orthopedics and sports medicine my entire life. I've worked with individuals from the middle school, high school, collegiate, Olympic hopefuls, adults across the spectrum. And all of this information is going to be pertinent to that. It doesn't matter what your skill level is. It doesn't matter what your age is. So we're looking for our best ways to balance our bodies. So thank you for being with me on this, and we'll see what we can do to help you out for the upcoming season. Thanks. So we're going to start with our self-assessment, looking at alignment in order to achieve optimizing alignment for peak performance. There's going to be a couple other pieces that go into that: mobility, stability, and functional movement, and we'll do one piece at a time. All right, so for optimal alignment, we have a very happy person over here because everything is all lined up. And the best way to tell if things are lined up is to be looking to see if you can put a dot right by your ear. It should then go through your shoulder, which should then come down through your hip. It may go just a smidge behind your knee and then down into your foot. So it should be a pretty decent vertical line that creates the alignment positioning of the body. For most of us, we're over here, and we're not quite so happy. But this has a lot to do with what we're doing during the day. And these days, we're doing a ton of technology, so that does not help at all. You've got an excessive arch in your neck. These muscles are really tight and sore from looking at your technology, from driving, just from poor posture. You then have to have a compensatory arch in your low back, and that low back is only supposed to be the last 5 vertebrae of your back is supposed to arch, and more often than not, it goes right up until the rib cage. Then it comes down into the pelvis, and because you've got these excessive arches in your neck, in your thoracic cage, which is your rib cage area, and in your low back, then the pelvis has to kind of jockey around and figure out where it needs to be to balance all that stuff on top of it. So now all of a sudden, that line, which is supposed to go from your ear into your shoulder, you can see your shoulder's not in the right place, and then it's supposed to come down and hit your hip, so now your hip is out of whack, and it's supposed to come down into your feet, except your center of mass line of your feet is in front of your feet. So there's not much going on here. That is basically a straight line alignment. And this puts you in a very vulnerable position because you have a tremendous amount of instability. And then what's going to try to create the stability is going to be muscle tendons and ligaments. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so for you and your self-assessment, the easiest thing that you can do is just take a picture of yourself from the side view and just look to see how well do I line up. It's ear over shoulder, shoulder over hip, hip over knee, knee over foot. Now, having said that, relative to the hip, a lot of people think that the hip is up here, which is really the top of the pelvis. So the hip is a joint. It's made by 2 bones. It's made by the pelvis and the femur. So the actual connection of the pelvis to the femur is here. And that's because the femur comes up, so the thigh bone comes up, there's a little bit of a jog, and then there's a neck to the femur, and then the ball and socket joint of the hip, it's like right about here. And so it's important that that positioning is where we need it to be, because clearly it's going to affect the entire function of the leg, as well as affecting how things are stacked up above it. So for you, you take a picture, check and see what you look like from the side. I just identify. You can use the edit piece in it. After you take a picture in your camera, you can use the edit tool and just get an idea of where you're at. You can get more involved in this, and you can take a picture from the back side if you want, or from the front side. Basically, you're just looking to see if your shoulders are fairly level, if your hips are level, hips are level, and then if your legs are coming out from there. The problem here that you're going to see more often than not is your shoulders are not going to be at a particular level, and then your pelvis is probably not going to be level, and with that not being level, then your hips automatically wind up being at 2 different heights, and then your legs wind up being at 2 different lengths. So that you can see from the front, but looking from the front or from the back is usually a little bit more difficult than looking from the side, but certainly you could look at either one to try to figure out where you are on your baseline. All right, so that will get you going on your alignment piece.
Here we go.
All right, now in your overall picture, as you're kind of putting your self-assessment together, what you need to think about is a continuum of alignment, mobility, stability, and function. So this continuum line down here is not so good, up here is better in terms of performance. Given that, if you could fall anywhere along this line. You know, I have a lot of ski friends that don't like multiple syllables in a word, so instead of using continuum, we can just use good to go. So this is basically your good to go line. And it's not a race, it's not a percentage, there's no grade on this, it's just giving you an indication as to where you are relative to the level of performance that you would like to have, whatever that may be. Alright, so if you've got this kind of alignment, you're going to have some decent performance. If you have this kind of alignment, then you're going to have difficulty in executing the performance level that you're looking for. The next piece relative to alignment, which is mostly bony alignment, has to do with the muscles and the tendons. Now the muscles themselves are a series of fibers, and they're pretty much in line with each other in general. And at the end of each of the muscles is a tendon. And the size of the tendon has to do with the size of the muscle. So this is a muscle tendon complex, and I call it a complex because there's a tendon on either side of the muscle. These tendons then insert into the bones. So the muscles are very happy when they're able to contract, because when they contract, their fibers glide one right over the other and create a powerful contraction. If by some chance those fibers are not lined up, then what happens is they try to contract and they're actually going around directions that they were never designed to go around, and they can't get their maximum contraction. So you're not going to get your peak performance out of a muscle that is not in proper alignment. At the same time, if the muscle fibers aren't aligned, then that means the tendons that are going to be plugging into the bones, those are not in good alignment either. And probably one of the easiest places to think about that is in the knee. So when you come to the knee, you've got your quadriceps in the front, you've got your muscle, tendon that goes up to the pelvis, tendon that goes up to your knee. If you've got this great alignment and the fibers of that rectus femoris, so in your quads, are able to contract, then you get a really powerful contraction through the quads, and the tendon's very happy because it kind of rolls right over that with the kneecap. But you start getting something like this, where the line of pull now is completely different, because now the quadriceps that are starting up here and have to go down there are now no longer in a direct alignment. And that tendon is trying to make the adjustment for where that muscle is lining up. And that's a very easy way to wind up with the tendinitis in the anterior aspect of the knee. So muscle tendon alignment is really important, and it's very much driven by the alignment of the bony alignment of the body. Muscle tendon alignment will give you two other things. It will give you the power of your contraction, because the appropriate alignment of the muscle and the tendon creates an appropriate length tension relationship. And every muscle works on an optimized length tension relationship, and if it's not in that position, if it's too tight, if it's too stretched, if it's being pulled at an angle when it's not supposed to go at an angle, you will not get the optimal muscle contraction from that muscle. The other thing that happens is that you've got proprioceptors, which are small little nerve endings, which are there's some proprioceptors in the muscles themselves, there are some proprioceptors in the tendons themselves, and oh, by the way, there are proprioceptors in the ligaments that are joining one bone to another. And so when you start taking this alignment away from the body, those proprioceptors, which is supposed to feed back information onto the body, are feeding misinformation into the body. And so it's trying to tell you how to contract properly. It's trying to tell you where you are positioned in space. But if you don't have a bony alignment, then all that information feedback system is just off by a little bit. And the longer it goes, for the more that you get muscle imbalances, alterations in length tension, then the feedback system is not able to self-correct. You literally have to stop, kind of realign everything to try to get things to work in a more proper way, which is you working through some motor control realignment pieces. So if your mobility, the other piece, we talked about the ligaments, we talked about muscle, we talked about tendon. We can't go into this a lot, but there's also these fascial slings, which are connective tissue slings. There's 12 of them in the body. and they're large slings that kind of hold everything together. There's one that goes from the shoulder to the opposite hip, which is really important, and then there's kind of a serape sling that goes crisscrosses in the front that gives some really important trunk stability. But the fascia is the outer covering, and unless you have bony alignment, unless you've got alignment of the muscle and the tendon, and the fascia will just follow the false alignment or the poor alignment that the body is in, because it simply wraps the body. If the fascia is not able to align correctly, then you've lost a tremendous amount of power in your positioning of the body and power in the stability of the body. So mobility of the soft tissue is really, really important, which gets around to why you'd like to have some type of stretching. So when you do your self-assessment, this does not mean necessarily static stretching and dynamic stretching, and there's going to be some other parts on the series that will give you some ways to create mobility. But easy ways for you to be looking for whether or not you've got some reasonable mobility is you laying on your back, just bringing your knees up to your chest. Will give you, your knees are supposed to get to your chest, so that will give you a pretty good idea of where you're at with that. Then from that position, you can go into what's called a figure 4 position, where you have one knee up and the other legs crossed, so you actually have a positioning of a 4, and that's going to give you an idea of the rotation of the hips. And then you can simply sit up and look to see, can you lean forward towards your legs without arching your back? You're literally just taking your belly button and moving yourself towards your legs. And then could you do this again in a straddle position and kind of go out to the right and out to the left? And then the last thing to check would be on your stomach, bringing your heel up towards your bum. And that you should be able to get pretty close up to there. And with that, will give you an idea of what the front of your leg may look like. All right, so for your mobility self-assessment, I wanted to just give you a little demonstration, which might be a little bit better than my artwork on the board. All right, the first thing you want to do is try knees to chest. So if you lay on your back and pull your knees up to your chest, they really ought to go to your chest. And if they don't, it just means that you're tight through the lumbo-pelvic region. We're looking for the tightness through the hip in general. It kind of catches a lot of different muscles. Here's your figure 4 position. This leg here should pretty much be horizontal without your pelvis rotating. So that pelvis should stay in a neutral position, and that leg should be able to drop out pretty much to horizontal. All right, there's your figure 4. From this position, you can come up into kind of a straight leg straddle. So you can do this up against the wall. It might make it a little bit easier for you. So you've got some good alignment through here. You bring your belly button down towards the table to move yourself forward, and just see what you might have for length. Gastrocnemius, so your calves and your hamstrings. This is very different than this. All right, so that will get your hands out farther, but that's not really what you want. You want it to come from here, so that the flexion is at the hips. How far forward you go doesn't matter. Again, this is just an assessment to see where you are baseline. And then you can go into a wider straddle position, or on the floor. You can go as much of a straddle as you would like. And then once again, belly button to the spine, coming in through the middle, as opposed to just simply arching over your back. And this will give you a little bit better idea of what's going on with your groin. To get even more of an idea of what's going on with your calf, you can take a towel or a strap and just pull your foot up. Now you're looking to see if your knee pops up. Of course, this is really important for ankle flexion, which is important in all of the snow sports. And so with that, you'd like to see a flat knee. You'd like to see your foot easily come to 90. What you'd really like to do is see it come about another 5 degrees, or 10 would be perfect, with that knee flat. So that gives you a pretty decent assessment of most of the stuff here. And then you just flip over, because you're going to check your quads. So actually your hip flexors just in general. So as long as your knee stays straight in alignment to your hips, so your knee doesn't flip out to the side, and your heel, as you pull it, comes towards your bum, that's what you're looking for. If, in order for you to get your heel towards your butt, if you've got to pull your leg out to your side or pull your leg around, that is not actually getting any measurement of length, because nothing's lined up in your body. So just, again, baseline measures, self-assessment, trying to bring some awareness as to where you are in the mobility in your body. So the next piece you need to add into this, after alignment, after mobility, is the stability of the body. And we're not going to get into much depth with this, and there'll be more on this later in the series. But there are 5 major points of stability in the body, which most of the time people don't think about. They think of core stability, which in and of itself is not well defined. So let's just look at this a little bit. In your person who is pretty well aligned, your most intrinsic piece of stability is your spinal cord itself. And there's tiny little muscles, the multifidi, that go from one vertebrae to another that will create the stability through that spine, which is really important, and people forget to do that. With that, the multifidi is the use of the diaphragm, so breathing is really important. Also with that is the transverse abdominis, which is the horizontal abdominal muscle, which people don't often engage either, and then actually the pelvic floor is part of that as well. So that's the stability that comes with the spine. Then there's another whole level of stability that from the next layer out, which are more along the lines of the back muscles, so the erector spinae, the latissimus dorsi. Now you start getting into your gluteus maximus, your gluteus medius on the side here. So you are moving out a little bit more to create what's basically lumbo-pelvic stability. So lumbar, which is the lower back region, to the pelvis. And remember, we were saying over here that this lumbar curve is only supposed to involve 5 of the vertebrae. So with that, what happens when you're in this type of an alignment, your vertebrae are in a lumbar lordosis, probably up someplace into the rib cage. So not only have you taken the 5 lumbar vertebrae, but you've taken the vertebrae that goes into the rib cage as well, which creates a lot of instability, which now creates a lot of issues for the muscles in terms of length-tension relationship, because now they're trying to contract and pull from directions that they were never designed to pull from. So you've got your spinal stability, you've got your lumbo-pelvic stability, you've got your pelvo-femoral stability. So pelvo-femoral, of course, would be between the pelvis and the femur. And for pelvo-femoral stability, that actually is pretty close to like, I don't know, 26, 23 muscles that go between the pelvis and the femur, which is a ton of muscles. There's a whole mess of small ones in the deep in the hip, and then there's more as you come out to more superficial to the hip. So really important that these muscles here are working properly. In order to have stability, we talked about this before, you have to have alignment and you have to have mobility. You have to have the combination of the two to give you stability. There's just no way around it. So if you're in your hip region and you already know that your hips are tight, then you know that you don't have the stability that you need through the hips, nor do you have the mobility. And the mobility in the hips are going to be really important for any type of directional change in whatever equipment you're standing on when you're on the hill. So you've got your spinal stability, you've got your lumbo-pelvic stability, you've got your pelvo-femoral stability, and then you've got 2 other places that people don't think about much. There are muscles in the foot, small intrinsic muscles in the foot. Much like the other muscles that we talked about, they also have proprioceptors in them. So if those small intrinsic muscles in the feet are not working well, so if you just kind of blow up the foot a little bit, the foot has an arch that kind of goes lengthwise, and then there's an arch that also goes across the foot. And those arches are made by bones. And so the bones are held together by ligaments, which have proprioceptors in them, and then there are small intrinsic muscles in the foot. So if your foot is like really collapsed, it makes it very difficult to get that proprioceptive information from your foot. And when you get into your ready position, which for any sport at all, just a little bit of ankle flexion, a little bit of knee flexion, a little bit of hip flexion, you will see that it brings your center of mass from right here, kind of over your ankle bone, to the center of the foot. And that center of the foot is going to be a really important driver for how you are able to direct whatever type of equipment that you're on when you're skiing. So, or skiing or boarding or telemarking. So, however, even if you had good alignment, if you did not have good stability of the foot, you're going to be lacking some information that you're bringing to the system. So with all of this, what you're trying to do is bring as many parts of the body in correct alignment, correct mobility, correct stability, so you can bring all of these tools from your body into your skiing and into your performance. The last piece of stability that people don't think about happens to be up in the shoulder area. So we're going to talk about upper lower body separation in a minute. But you've got your shoulder blades on your back, so on your rib cage, and then they connect to the arm itself, and then to the collarbone in the front. So that's your shoulder girdle. So it's really important that that shoulder girdle is held to the body through the shoulder blade stabilizers, which are called the scapular stabilizers. So having good stability up here is equally as important. So you've got your spine stability right here. You've got your lumbopelvic stability. You've got your pelvic-femoral stability. You've got your foot. And then you've got your shoulder girdle up here. So if you're having trouble with things on the hill, perhaps you haven't brought these pieces of stability with you, which is actually quite important.
I am unmuted. We're going to stop the video because it seems like there's some questions coming in from our audience. My video is streaming a little behind everybody, so Angelo is telling me when I should ask the questions. But we do have a couple of questions, and the first one goes back to the previous segment, which had to do with those positions that Marjorie, you showed us to do, and the question was, are those assessment positions, should they be done on a regular basis, not just for assessment, but for, more mobility?
Yes, absolutely. So I picked those specifically because once you get yourself into those positions and you're finding that you've got limitations in length in those positions, that's a perfect place to be starting some type of a stretching program. And I did focus on the important muscle groups that you would need for snow sports. So I would say absolutely, because I picked a little bit of the low back, and then we went into the hip, and then we went into the thigh, and then into the lower part of the leg shank. So yes, if you assess yourself and you find that you have difficulty in any of those particular positions, I would strongly urge that you begin to incorporate that into some kind of a program that you're doing. But I'll also suggest, if you're trying to gain muscle length, stretching at night before you go to bed is awesome, because you will have gotten maximal length, whatever your muscles are willing to give you at that point in time, and then they rest overnight, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever it might be. So it's a great time of day to stretch. People always think about stretching before and after working out, which is also important. But if you're specifically trying to gain length, definitely take the time to stretch before you go to bed and see if that won't kind of jumpstart your whole program. With that as well, of course, there's nothing better than massage therapy. It's just hard to get to these days.
Thank you. So here's another one that I actually can relate to. Not all of us were born with this perfect alignment. In fact, I'm sure that most of us weren't. And so for those of us who have either one or both knees that are a little knock-kneed, what are some but that's like just part of our alignment, natural alignment. Do you have any suggestions as to what we can do to help us be better aligned?
Absolutely. So unless there's something wrong with one of your hip joints that would create the knock knee, the knock knee is probably coming from muscle tendon tightness. There's not much that you can't fix by lengthening out the tissue the way it should be lengthened. So for people, particularly if they have an asymmetry and that's on one side more than the other, as opposed to if it presents in a similar fashion on both sides, that has a, for me personally, when I look at someone, that's a greater tendency that they kind of own that in a bony alignment piece. But if you've got one side different than the other, could easily relate back to a sequence of injuries or just your postural habits. Do you stand equal weight on both feet? Have you sprained an ankle? Have you injured a knee? Whatever that might be. But so don't fret that one knee is knock kneed and the other one is not. So you've got alignment only in half your body. I would go back up and really work the soft tissue and mobility of your low back and your hips and see if that doesn't clear it. Now, it might be taking you 2 or 3 months of really focused program, but I would go there first before you start wedging and jimmying things up to try to create an external change in the alignment of the body. I'd rather work internally and be perfectly clear that everything that could be mobile is mobile, which would allow for the intrinsic alignment of the body.
That makes a lot of sense, especially and not that we're going to get into this here, but especially when you go into a boot fitters, they may want to give you some heel lifts, and then you start to get into all that external stuff that you're talking about. So really, we need to, for those people who have the situation, need to do as much as we can. Is this is what you're saying? We need to do as much as we can for ourselves with the soft tissue.
Absolutely. And it all depends on timing. You know, if you see a boot fitter, you're going into the season, you're not going to make changes in December for the rest of the ski season. So you might just need to run with whatever adjustments that they make to try to help your skiing. But the other thing that does is it gives you a glass ceiling because they have externally put you into alignment. Then you've never given the length tension relationship a possibility for those other muscles. So what I would say is, okay, fine, you know, run with the external alignment facilitation, but then, you know, when the snow melts and you've got a little bit more time, then I would definitely get after a really great mobility and, you know, pay attention to your posture too. And see if you can't clean that up before the next season, and then go back and see the boot fitter beginning the season of the next year, and just it'd be really great to see some changes.
Right. We're going to do one more, and then we'll move on to the next section. And this is, so assuming too much remote computer work and/or driving, how can we correct or avoid misalignment? And you're smiling, so you know this.
Oh yeah. Yeah, these days, who doesn't know this? But
Right.
yeah, I mean, honestly, all you gotta do is lay down on the floor, put your feet up on a chair so your back is kind of sort of flat. It won't be too flat once you get off your computer. Your hips are at 90, your knees are at 90, so you can use a couch, you can use a chair, you can use anything. And literally just lie there for 5 or 10 minutes and give your back a chance to align to the floor, which will give it some type of a feedback. And then in that position, you could bring your knees up to your chest and just kind of move around a little bit and try to get that tissue to relax. Also in that position, make sure you tuck your chin a little bit, because being on that computer, it will give you that arch in your neck. So something as simple as that. The other thing that I love is the foam roller, but you put the foam roller at the back of your head and then all the way down to your bum. So you use it the long way and you lie on top of that so your knees are bent up and your feet are flat. That's awesome for just hanging out there. I mean, these are easy ones, which my ski friends like the easy ones. But you can just lie on the roller and give yourself, you know, 5 or 10 minutes on that. Just roll a little bit over it, right to left. So it's not like a trigger point. You're literally on top of that roller, and see if you can't regain some kind of alignment. There's several other things you could do, but those are the simplest and least effort things that you can do.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I think, Angela, we should start moving again. What do you think?
So the last piece of what I'm presenting is functional movement. So you need to have alignment, which then drives your mobility, which then drives your stability, which then will allow you to have functional movement. Now, functional movement is kind of really a basic movement that you have down towards the bottom of your good-to-go line. It's really the movement patterns that you need to own before you get going on your fitness and your conditioning programs. So with that, an easy way to do self-assessment on functional movement, which also incorporates the self-assessment on mobility, is really simple. You're going to do a two-legged squat, a one-leg squat, and with that one-leg squat, you're actually going to capture some of your balance. And like I said, this is really basic work, and that we'll be able to show you what it looks like. But on a two-legged squat, what should happen, since the movement's coming from your hips down into your knees and into your feet, as you bend your knees, your hips should stay over your knees should stay over your feet. The alignment should persist. If not, usually what happens with people is something happens up typically through the hip. Oops. And the knees wind up going in. In order to adapt for the knees going in, then the lower leg has to go out. And of course the feet need to find some way of being flat, and that's when they usually get super flat. This is an issue. Besides the fact it's really hard to walk or to get down the hill with a positioning like this, it has to do with the hip joint. So not the pelvis as an individual bone, but the hip joint itself. And in the hip joint, the big piece to this is the femur. If this pelvis goes into an anterior tilt like that, so it's dropped forward, then the femur, which is the long bone, is captured and goes into an internal rotation. So it kind of rotates inward, which creates those knee going in. The knee is only a hinge joint, so the knee follows whatever the hip and the foot tells it to do. So the knee rotates in, but you have to walk straight ahead. So if your knees stayed like that, then you'd be banging your knees. So then the lower part of your leg will try to move itself out a little bit so that you can clear moving forward. And then your feet have to make whatever adaptation it makes. Usually they flatten in order to, at the end, have some type of an alignment from the hip down to the foot. Unfortunately, it's just taken a side street through the knees. So when you see an alignment like that, on a side view, you'll more likely than not see that pelvis in an anteriorly tilted position. In this position, the reason why I focus on this is the most common out of balance position that you'll see. All right, so on a two-legged squat, hopefully you can go down through your two-legged squat and not have any kind of an issue. If you do, then you are pretty far down on this good-to-go continuum. That's a substantial issue. Where you most likely will see it is in your one-legged squat. So when you go into your one-legged squat, all you should have to do is with your pelvis, you've got your two legs. All you should have to do is pick up one leg with a little bit of a shift over onto the stance leg and stand on the one leg. What you should not have to do is that you should not have to make a huge shift at the hip, or you step out sideways to get onto that single foot. So you should be well enough aligned. It's a little bit of a shift, pick up the other foot, you're on that leg, you've got some decent alignment. The reason why the one-legged squat helps assess your balance is because the amount of activity that you have to employ in order to stand on that foot gives you a pretty good idea of how well balanced you are. And your balance has everything to do with alignment, mobility, stability. So it's really, for me, it's part of your functional movement. So that's going to be really important. So you don't really have to go through all these millions of different balance assessments. Basically, if you can't stay aligned when you stand on one foot, then your balance is going to be poor. Because that's the first thing you got to do in order to do single leg balance. So it's easy enough to see. sometimes it's easier to see in a videotape, but you can capture it in a single leg, in a static picture on a single leg squat and the two-legged squat. For both of these in these squats, if you're going to do static picture, if you just do a knee flex from about 50 to 60 degrees of knee flexion, you don't have to go way down into 90 degrees of knee flexion. You'll see it pop up pretty fast. Either you're aligned or you're not. The other thing that will happen in a single leg squat, not only will you see the knees go in like that, but you might actually see your whole body rotating around that single leg. And that's even more of an issue. That just talks about the lack of stability up above. So there's your pretty easy self-assessment for functional movement, and it just keeps backing up because your functional movement is very dependent on stability, and your stability is very dependent on alignment and mobility. So it's kind of it's a package deal when you put all that together. But it's a very powerful package deal because if you have all that in place, you can start your fitness and conditioning activities and really make great progress. If you wind up starting a fitness program and you keep getting hurt, or the muscles keep pulling up, or whatever it is keeps inhibiting your progress to move towards your performance, it usually means that something is off in alignment, mobility, stability, or functional movement.
So probably some of us after seeing that are thinking, that's me. That's me. I know what she's talking about. Especially in the one-legged squats, I'm thinking, yeah, that's why I have trouble with those one-footed pain in the S turns. I think that's it. We did get a question from one of our tele-ed staff members, Karen Delury. What about the posterior pelvic tilt, flat lumbar, flat feet, and hyperextended knees?
Well, that's quite the package. All right, so I would say the bulk of the time people are in an anterior tilt. There are points of time people are in a posterior tilt. All you want to do is get yourself back into alignment, and it still typically has to do with some muscles are too tight, some muscles are too lengthened, and your stability is off. So with those people, you just got to figure out where that's coming from. But the hyperextended knee is a pretty good indicator that whether it's you've got a flat back or a sway back, that your pelvis is not in a good position. So the knee. So for instance, the knee may naturally hyperextend, right? So you might own hyperextended knees. You can stand with the knees slightly flexed and take the pressure off the joint itself. But if you're using your knee extension, and in this case, the knee hyperextension is part of your stability. So if you're in knee hyperextension all the time, it's a really good indicator that as you go back up the chain, you're missing some sections of stability. Lack of positioning and a posterior pelvic tilt has a lot to do with activation of the glutes. The glute max, glute medius, which is on the side. So max in the back, medius on the side. And then it's going to be really hard because the pelvis isn't in neutral for that transverse abdominis to be working as well. So although it's not identical to the more common anterior tilted pelvis, there are definitely issues in muscle imbalances and intrinsic stability.
One more question from gentleman in the crowd, Paul Capolini. What about those of us with knee replacements? How critical are the squats?
Pretty darn critical. Those knee replacements were done to supposed to theoretically give you back your knee flexion. So this is what happens in any joint replacement. They don't want to do the joint replacement too soon because they don't last all that long, and they don't want to do the revision. So you've spent a chunk of years kind of dragging that leg around, waiting for your knee replacements. Then you go in and have the knee replacement done, and usually the rehab intervention for knee replacement is pretty low level functional activity. They're not really expecting you to go back to ski, not that you can't. So you bring to the table a lot of stuff that needs to be addressed. Things that were issues before the knee replacement, which were probably causative agents for that knee replacement, and then what you're left with afterwards. But having said that, it still goes back to working on your postural alignment, mobility and stability. You would be more complex than an average patient because now you've got that complexity of what was happening to that knee that made it break down to that extent that it had to be replaced. But the principles are the same. And you may not get yourself back to 100% because you've got replacement parts in there, but don't let that stop you in your efforts to get as much back on track as possible.
All right, thanks. Angelo, let's roll them.
Okay, so for your functional assessment, your two-legged squat, hip should be over knee, knee is over foot, and you literally just drop down into a squat. I mean, it's 50 degrees is fine. I mean, it's going to tell you whether or not your knees drop right over your, it's in between your first and second toes, right? So that should not, your knee should not drop to the inside of that toe. And what you will see, if both my knees tried to drop to the inside of my toes, then there's not enough space for me, so then I have no choice as a compensation but to widen my stance. So now I'm standing outside the width of my hips. And then as I go into flexion, as my knees go in, you can actually see my femurs rotating, and then the lower leg is going to make the adjustment, and my feet go super flat. Right? So if you see that presentation, you know that there's a number of things that need to be worked on. So ideally, hip over knee, knee over foot, you go into your two-legged squat, everything lines up, knee goes in between your first and second toe. All right, from here, you go into your one-legged squat. A little bit of a weight shift onto that single leg, you pick up the other leg, and there's your balance part right there. Right? So you've just got through testing your balance, and now you just go into your single leg squat. And you're looking again for that to go over your first or second toe, so your knee is in the same alignment position, as opposed to, I'll do it on the other side just to accentuate it, if you go to pick up this leg and this hip has to shift way over in order for you to stabilize yourself, and then when you go down, your knee winds up going to the inside of that foot, and then that's where your corkscrew usually comes in, because you get a big rotational piece with that. So what you would rather have, here aligned hip over knee, knee over foot, little bit of a shift onto this leg, and then when you flex, that knee goes right over the first and second toes. So the alignment is there even when you have to get on one foot, and it gives you an assessment of your balance, which hopefully it's not a challenge. It shouldn't be a challenge for your balance to get onto one foot.
Yes.
All right, so the question becomes, who cares? Besides the fact it would be really awesome for everyone to pay attention and increase their awareness for alignment, mobility, stability, functional movement, just for your orthopedic health, but this is all about skiing. So how does this relate to the fundamentals of, it's not just skiing, sorry, snow sports. So how does this relate to the fundamentals of snow sports? We have five for skiing, 6 for snowboarding, and telly, so I just kind of mushed them together a little bit. Because the principle, really interestingly, across the different pieces of equipment, the fundamentals are very similar. All right, so one of the fundamentals is fore-aft pressure management. Now, fore-aft pressure management is not that hard to do, especially when you're in an aligned position. Like I said, when you're in your ready position, slight flex at the knee, slight flex at the ankle, slight flex at the hip, then that center mass comes right over the arches of that foot, and it makes it really easy to be on top of whatever piece of equipment that you're on and maneuver it front to back and actually right to left. So where you run into problems and where you have to wrestle with your equipment is when your center of mass is not lined up over the arch of your foot. And so fore-aft pressure, medial lateral right to left pressure, really like low-level skills. And we should be able to manage those pretty easily. If you cannot, where you might be able to get away with it if you've got some decent skiing skills, but it will come back and haunt you in the bumps. Because as you go up and over the undulation of the terrain, your ability on this continuum to manage the fore-aft pressure and to manage the medial lateral pressure will really kind of pop out. But if you're right over your foot, then it becomes these little baby adjustments, right? So there's not these huge movements that you're trying to make, which will throw you out of balance. But if the small adjustments happen when you're aligned, big adjustments are needed when you're not aligned. All right, so fore aft pressure and medial lateral pressure. Both a management, really it's a management of where your center of mass is as it drives down from the top of your body down to your foot. All right, now, inclination and angulation. Inclination is easy. I can do that at the drop of a hat, right? All you gotta do is lean into the hill. So everything is straight as a board, just you and gravity, hoping that you're not inclining too far over, that gravity gets the better of you and bang, you're on the ground. All right, so inclination is not really what we need to worry about, the angulation. All right, so now I've talked about alignment, mobility, stability, functional movement relative to getting you going on your good to go line. All right, so once you start asking your body for angulation, you now need to have dynamic alignment, not just static alignment, in dynamic mobility, in dynamic stability, because in order to get angulation, it's not just a line, creating angles, because we're all connected one bone to the next. So what it actually requires is rotational forces in order to create that angulation. And the forces literally go juxtaposed to each other within the body itself. And this is something that people don't think about very much. You actually have to stabilize your own body against another body part. And that's why it's so important that all of this stuff is lined up and these stability pieces are in place. So when called upon, if you are going to rotate the lower quarter of or the lower half of your body, and you're going to rotate it to create some angles, and you're going to, the angulation is going to move all the way up through your body, then you're creating some rotational patterns, and one part of your body needs to stabilize against the other. Now, if you're in alignment, it's really just a rotational piece with the muscles all at their optimal length tension relationship. The proprioceptors are giving the right information back into the body. And although it takes some skill, it's not all that hard. However, if you're here and you don't have the alignment, so you're already unstable, your ligaments are already pressured, so they're already kind of preloaded. Your muscle tendons are not happy because some are too short, some are too long, a lot of tension in different and inappropriate positions on the muscle and the tendons. And you cannot have stability. If you look like that, there is no way you can stack up these stability sections of your body. So now you're trying to lay angulation over that. Well, you already have instability, you're adding rotation, and you're asking one section of your body to move in one direction, and another section of your body to be moving in another direction. And whenever we're usually talking and demonstrating, we're standing in one place. Remember that we're going through an arc of motion. And so how that angulation occurs, it gets metered out in one direction, then it has to change and go into the other direction. And that is a lot of intrinsic stability in the body. So if you're not aligned, there is no way that you're going to be able to execute that angulation that we've been talking about, which you pretty much just default to is inclination. Same principle, upper-lower body separation, but almost even more difficult. Because as you get into your turns that are a little bit tighter, and your legs are going completely in one direction, your upper body needs to be in the other direction, you have got to be lined up, and then all you're going to do is rotate that spine. Because you've got 32 vertebrae in that spine, and if each one of them was available to rotate, then you'd be in good shape. You're over here, you've got your vertebrae here. We said we're only supposed to be 5 in that lumbar lordosis. You've now got, probably 10 of them tied up in that lumbar lordosis. You got another 8 of them tied up here in your cervical lordosis. There's nothing left there to have any kind of rotational stability out of your spine. If you don't have spinal stability, there's no way you can have lumbo-pelvic stability. You have an anterior pelvic tilt. No lumbo-pelvic stability there either. You can't have pelvo-femoral stability because pelvo-femoral is between the pelvis and the femur, and that's your hip joint. That's out of position. And then you've got your center of mass in the wrong place so that you couldn't possibly have stability out of the foot. So it's critical to say, and then you throw in the shoulder girdle as well, which is huge in the upper-lower body separation. If you have those shoulders that look like you've been at a desk all week long, which happens to most of us, then that is going to bring your center of mass even more forward. So you just can't get the stability out of your upper lower separation, and so you lose it all the time, and then you have to pull in other movement patterns to try to help you move your way through the turn. So these, I put this line here because these are more dynamic, but these dynamic movement patterns are directly dependent on these more static presentations. All right, another one is equipment rotation through the snow surface. So what I'm going to say with that is that this, which is you are the one making that equipment rotate through the snow surface. Now, what I'm not saying is you're not just throwing your arms and creating the rotation. All of you, the spine, the pelvis, the hip, the knee, the foot, shoulder girdle, all of that is being used to help the equipment rotate through the surface, right? So when I say that you're rotating it from the top down, it's not a shoulder girdle swing. It's the entire body. Just look at how powerful that could be if all these pieces are in place. Now, all of a sudden, you're just fine-tuning the movement of that equipment through the snow. It's not that big a deal. All you have to do is make small adjustments to get that to work well. If you're finding yourself really struggling trying to make these adjustments of the equipment rotation, then you're not bringing all of the tools to the table. They're just not there. And then regulation of pressure through the arc, that is a metering out of all of this movement pattern from the start of your turn to the belly of the turn, the bottom of the turn, into your transition, and whatever your next turn is. And you have to take all of this now, in addition to it being there statically, in addition to it being there dynamically, on a motor control basis, right? So this is your ability to execute and to ask your body to do things either a lot or a little, or the timing of it. It has to do with the regulation of the pressure through the arc. So what cracks me up is when people talk about how the PSIA ed staff, they all turn the same, and every turn looks the same on the hill, and it's a pre-packaged performance. And I look at it, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. If I could look like that, I would be a happy camper, because that means if I can regulate the pressure through the arc of the skis, so every turn is looking almost the same, whether I'm coming down off of a pitch, or the pitch starts to change, or whatever it might be, the snow conditions change, then I have just been a master of being able to take my alignment, my mobility, my intrinsic stability, my functional movement up against my equipment, and then throw in some angulation and upper lower body separation, and bingo, there you go, you got it. There's your regulation of pressure through the arc of the turn. It's not that simple, but it's really important. So I belabored these pieces because you have to have that to start here on your good to go line, and then all of that is going to bring you to the performance that you're looking for. So if you're having difficulty moving from a particular certification level, and you're kind of feeling like you're hitting a glass ceiling, there's something in here that's not working well, and it has nothing to do with your boots, has nothing to do with your skis. It probably has a lot to do with you, and you're just not bringing all the tools to the table.
So there's a lot of information in that. And we have a bunch of questions, and for the sake of time, it's a little after 8, but I think that we're gonna be going a little bit longer than an hour, if that's okay. I'd like to go back to, because there were a couple questions around this, Marjorie, the one-legged squat that you mentioned, and a couple questions around it. One was, would it be helpful to do the squat with a, is it a good idea to do these squat exercises with ski boots on?
Okay, so once you get into fitness and conditioning, there's all sorts of theories and approaches. So for me, I do everything on this functional movement part. So when you're down at the bottom of that good to go line, barefoot, because I want to see how your foot works, how stable your foot is relative to the lower leg shank, relative to your quads and hams, then up into the pelvis. So I don't want you to rely on the ski boot when you're trying to get yourself back on track. Now, if you do everything that you possibly can do, you've
addressed all the mobility issues, you're super stable, or is at least as stable as you can get your body, your posture's awesome, you've worked some functional movement, and then you get, to the point where you still need a little bit of help, then sure, put the boot on and go see a boot fitter. But I would not exercise in your boots because you're cheating. For my approach, you're using the boot to stabilize you. I would rather see you, remember the knee is a hinge joint, so I would rather see you move back up the kinetic chain and work on probably hip mobility and that lumbopelvic, so low back, transverse abdominis stability, and see if you can't improve your single leg balance. It's usually through that the pelvic girdle is not stable enough when you have difficulty shifting from a two-legged squat to a one-legged squat. So I would completely exhaust that as a possibility, and before you start what I call jury-rigging your system, like it's trying to make you as stable as possible. But it's a great question. So if you can't do a good quality one-legged squat, don't do them. Do two-legged squats and challenge yourself in the two-legged squats, and that's a whole nother fitness continuum thing in terms of the number that you do, the surface that you do them on, eyes open, eyes closed. I mean, there's a bazillion different ways you can do two-legged squats and really challenge your system, which will hopefully get the system in a position where it can start managing a single leg squat without any type of external support.
So along those lines, then if somebody is doing them, with no ski boots, bare feet, but notices that the knee collapses to the inside, are there specific muscle groups that they should focus on to prevent that from happening?
And this is a part that everybody pushes back against. Get off your feet. You don't have the stability that you need on your feet. So what you do is you get into a supine position on your back, or you get into a prone position on your stomach, or you get into a hands and knees position. So if your knees are still going in, you don't have the spine stability that you need. Double check on your hip mobilization, right? So do you have the hip rotation? Is it freed up enough? And then the stability through that transverse abdominis. Those are exercises that you do on the long length of the roller, again, from your head to your butt, knees to chest. Can you stay on top of the roller without rolling off of it? Those are the ones where your hands and knees and you're doing the bird dog exercise. You can probably Google that, but your spine has to be flat. You lift one arm and opposite leg. You should be able to do 3 sets of 30 of those for spinal stability. So there's a whole mess of stuff up above the knee that's not working properly. So don't keep trying to ask the single leg squat to work when it can't work because you haven't given it the fundamental base that it needs to work from. So I just get people off their feet and go back up the kinetic chain and get that a little bit more stabilized.
And I'm going to interject here and say that, Marjorie, you were the one who, when I was writing the book, you had told me that really for like ACL injury, re-injury prevention, that really working the muscles around the pelvis, stabilizing those muscles was so important.
Absolutely critical, and there are mounds of research out on that now. Absolutely. I mean, to ACL prevention programs are all about low back and hip. Very little to do with the knee itself. There's a little bit to do with the foot, but really it's low back and hip.
Well, thank you for that. Last question, and then we'll continue. If you have flat feet, what adjustment can be made to get the center of mass back toward the ankle?
All right, so it depends on where the flat-footed presentation is coming from. If it's strictly within the foot, then I'd be looking at the foot intrinsics and trying to, you could Google this too, on foot doming, trying to get those foot intrinsics a little bit stronger. It is unusual. The foot, like the knee, is kind of an expression of how it's been loaded from above. So I would go back and look at your trunk stability and make sure that's as stable as possible. If you've got great trunk stability, you have great hip mobility, if you've done the best you can to stabilize the foot intrinsics without any type of other adjunct equipment, then definitely footbeds. you know, now you have to have some external support in there to try to support that foot, because you've tried everything else intrinsically. So the feet are interesting. The older the foot gets, the more beat up it's been over time too.
Lucky us.
Yeah.
All right, let's continue.
All right, so we talked about how this applies to skiing, so now it's time just to kind of summarize the whole thing and figure out what the take-home message is. If you haven't figured it out by now, it's definitely alignment, the importance of alignment, the importance of mobility, the importance of stability, the importance of functional movement. And with that, just trying to put some things into context, what's really important is the position of this pelvis, and this really is, you can consider it the foundation of the body. So if this pelvis isn't in a good position, so it's either anteriorly tilted or it can be crooked right to left, if you look at a forward view, everything above it and everything below it is not going to work correctly. So that the positioning of that is really important. So the pelvis can be considered the foundation of the body. So some of the support beams, you know, for me, when I think of stability, I think of these the support beams, similar to the support beams of a house. So if you're going to do a renovation of a house, you can't knock down the support beams. They have to be there. Same thing here. These 5 places of stability in the body have to be there in order to have stability of the body itself. And then if you're thinking about a house again, when you throw up the frame, it's really important that the frame is aligned correctly so that there is, you know, when you throw the sheetrock up, there's no cracks in the wall, the windows actually fit and work appropriately, the stairs actually go up straight. And all of that, to me, is the mobility in the body, which is a length-tension relationship of the muscles and the tendons. So they kind of frame on top of the support beams and the foundation of the pelvis. The other way of thinking it is with your car. So you know enough that you are supposed to change the oil in your car every certain number of miles. And you just don't question that. You don't wait until the engine freezes up and then you do something about it, because then it's too late. So it's the same thing, mobility relative to your oil change. You really ought to be working on your mobility every single day, to be honest with you, so that you can keep things moving and so things don't seize up and break on you. And then the last piece, you can also think about alignment relative to a car with a rebalancing of your wheels, right? So if you start seeing your wheels tracking a little bit, or if the mechanic sees it, right away, they're like, okay, you need to do something to get these things realigned and rebalanced, or else you're going to wear out all your tires, right? And the car's going to pull to one side. Well, for us, without the alignment, you're wearing out that knee, so there's your total knee replacement. You're wearing out your hip, that's your total hip replacement. You're wearing out your shoulders because you don't have that proper alignment, there's your rotator cuff repair. Right? So all of this we know and understand just fundamentally through other things in our lives, but for some reason we don't think about the body as a mechanical tool, and so we don't consider that to be important. So here, the alignment, mobility, stability, functional movement, it relates to skiing, and the final piece that I want to throw in here is also it relates to injury and injury prevention. Because when you're out of alignment, you have preloaded those ligaments in a bad way. Because otherwise the ligaments are fairly relaxed. When you're lined up, the ligaments they're not lax, they're just relaxed. So they've got an alignment that works really well to them. You start throwing things out of alignment. Now you're asking the ligaments that connect one bone to another to actually try to stabilize. The same thing with the muscles. The muscles are supposed to be powerful levers and forces in the body. Things are out of alignment, now you're asking the muscles to do some stabilization. And so if you're wondering why certain muscles are pulling up all the time, then you just don't have your alignment, you don't have the mobility. So be thinking about that too. If you are trying to motivate yourself to do something about your alignment, your mobility, and your stability, you don't want to go to the hill with your ligaments preloaded, your muscles preloaded, and your tendons preloaded, because you're just an accident waiting to happen. So that's not good. And for me personally, I don't want to get to the point where someone tells you you just can't ski anymore because you haven't taken care of your equipment, which is you, across time. All right, so I think that's plenty to leave you with right now. What I'd like to do is thank the PSIA Eastern Division as well as the education staff for letting me be a part of this series and to be the kickoff person as well. It was very quite nice. And I'd also like to thank you for letting me into your lives and your homes, and hopefully this is going to help you out. I need to thank Tom Barbeau, who's my videographer, who's taken time to help me pull all of this together. So hoping that this helps and makes a difference not only in this ski season but upcoming ski season. And I hope to see you on the hill.
All right, don't go anywhere yet. Marjorie, thank you so much for everything that you've taught us tonight. I feel motivated, inspired, and that I know a little bit more tonight than I did yesterday. I also think I need to hit the books a little bit. um, and I want to thank everybody out there who's listening in for continuing to stick with us. I know some people had a little bit of trouble on the technology, and I'll throw out a couple of suggestions because I had some trouble as well. That's why I've got headphones. They seem to be working okay, and I also went back to an old-fashioned Ethernet cable, which helped me with the streaming. So I'm not sure if either of those will help going forward, but I would also say that there will be a recording of this available as soon as we can get that available to you. It will be. And let's see, what else do I need to say? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Marjorie, unmute yourself so you can say whatever you want to say to everybody.
So I also want to say thank you to the ed staff and to everyone who was able to sit in, and just to keep what I've given you in a perspective, right? That was just an assessment tool, and there's plenty more to be done after that. And the issues that I identified were the majority of issues that you're going to see. So 80% of the people would probably present in the way in which I presented. But now there's you've got all these other nuances, and you've got the 20% of people that are going to be looking a little bit differently. So I did the best I could to kind of hit as many people as possible, and I'm just hoping that it helped.
Well, thank you so much. And I do want to give you everyone a preview for next week. We have a continued topic of stability, mobility, and flexibility with a new group of contributors, Joe Forte doing a bit on balance, and Karen Delory, tele-examiner, doing some yoga with us, and Jim Polinchuk will be presenting activation, mobility, and stability activities for us. So stay tuned, and we so look forward to seeing you next week. And I'm getting a notice here to sign back in into the link when you get that for next week. So thanks very much. Have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you soon.